Hey, everybody, welcome to another edition of Practical Pet Chat. It is always great to have you join us, so thank you for taking a moment to spend time with Lorin and I. Lorin, we're going to talk about something that is really confusing for a lot of folks out there. I know you and I have some spirited conversations about it, and that is the grading of foods. And you hear these terms thrown out, and I will have people use that as a justification for something they're buying. And sometimes it really breaks my heart because I feel they've been misled. But there was a part of it about you've got to learn what these things actually mean and how they impact your choices. How have you approached the grading, in particular when it comes to foods? You got feed grade, human grade, all over it. I just think that there's not a little chart for people when they're making these decisions. So how do you give guidance, especially when the folks were coming into your store, so that they had a better understanding of what that actually meant, what the impact was, so they could make a better choice?
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people know or think they should even care. You have a lot of people in the industry talking about feed grade versus food grade. That's not something you're going to see on the package. A lot of industry folks will talk about it and they'll talk about what the differences are and you know, a lot of times the consumer will come back and be, I don't really know what that has to do with me. I buy my food from such and such a store, so I know it's going to be good. The problem I think it needs to be somewhat more relatable, for the average consumer onto what that means. So, it's also has to do with demographics. I was going to say logistics, but demographics, because feed grade in areas with farming and things like that isn't necessarily perceived as a negative. So it really, I think, needs to be brought more to the understanding of um, specifics that would more greatly impact the understanding of the consumer. And by that, here's what I mean. Feed grade, feeding feed to animals who get feed, farm animals and things like that. That's one thing. Even within their food, there's going to be levels of good, better, best, right?
Yep.
When you're talking about our companion animals, it really is a broad dynamic because some of that feed grade should really be called garbage grade. It's downright garbage. And I don't mean like cherry picking out of the dumpster, which I know, some people do for themselves and their animals. I mean garbage, slimy, wilted, nasty vegetables, decayed, diseased, 4D meats, things that you'd be aghast at understanding is in the food that you're feeding some of your animals, some of your companion animals who, are your fur kids. Um, and then there's feed grade, like, which has its own issues, the scrapings and dustings off the bottom of a silo, where all the grain and all the nasty pieces of the grain and everything are down there. And it's not really food, it's the husks and things like that. Food grade has its own broad dynamic as well, because food grade should be what we would think food grade would be something that we would eat, right? That would be food grade. Unfortunately, in the pet industry, that's not always what that is. Um, And it's difficult. It's difficult to the consumer. It's difficult to understand, who is making the food, who the co-packer is, the quality and ingredient. And within any co-packer, they could make some of the best. And I know co-packers that make some of the quote unquote best in their genre. And then they also make some of the worst that's out there. because all they're doing is making the food according to what the person who's paying them has decided. And therein lies the problem. People don't know. Um, to further complicate this, let's take that over to human grade. Human grade has a set of criteria that most companies don't really aren't willing to pay for. To call yourself truly human grade, legally, to call yourself human grade pet food, that means that the pet food needs to be made in a human grade facility where human foods are made on a regular basis. And there is a human grade food inspector in the facility at the time that the food is being made. So, ideally, that would be what you would want. You would want human grade. You want to think that your kid is eating the quality of food that you would probably be eating. But a lot of companies call themselves human grade, and they're not really human grade certified. So it's a problematic situation out there, and it's a difficult one, I think, for consumers to overcome, which is one of the reasons why you and I talk about trying to add fresh, to trying to add real food wherever you can. I had a conversation this past week with somebody where we were talking about, adding vegetables to kibble when so much of the kibble that's out there is primarily vegetarian anyway. By the time you take into account the amount of water that's in the meat that's in there and how that gets cooked out and the vast amount of fruit and vegetables and all this other kind of stuff that's in there, and then whether or not it's garbage grade or food grade or feed grade or whatever it is, how much real consumable protein, meat protein is there for your facultative or if you're talking about cats, carnivore type animals. Um, adding real adding real meat foods to the kibble can only do better. It can only improve the situation.
Yeah, I like that you point out not only are there different grades, but there's different ways that the co-packers, and when we say co-packers, everybody, for those who aren't familiar with the term, what we're talking about is the folks that actually produce and manufacture these foods. I like that you pointed out that the co-packers have different processes for each one of the things that they're doing in their facilities.
For each
So
company.
it's not something that you can just say, oh, if it comes from this co-packer, I'm good. Or if it comes from, this brand, it's going to be great. There are so many different variations, and there's just not that transparency. Some people like yourself are able to call and have those conversations. Your average pet parent isn't going to dive that deep into it. And so it's one of the reasons we're having this conversation, of course. But it is just that whole like, wait, you mean there's a feed grade? That's not something that we hear in our human shopping experience. And so much of what we do as pet parents is driven by things that we like to correlate over to the pet world. And so, human grade, food grade uh, makes sense to us. Feed grade might be something that some folks listening are going, I didn't even like, why does that even exist? Cost, just flat out, it's, a cost saver. And so helps brings the cost down. There's those that will argue for sustainability reasons and it's good for the environment not to waste. And I, I'm not going to go down that path, but what I will say is I agree with you that to me, it doesn't matter which part of that, good, better, best it ends up on. That is why it's so important that we're adding fresh things in if you're feeding a kibble to your pets. That freshness is something, no matter what, is going to be missing from that packaged kibble, you know, uh, final product. And it's one of those where you start and where you end are so different. And that's why understanding these three different levels is so important. But I've also seen and heard, the studies, the folks, all the rest of it that talk about by the time it goes through this process, it doesn't matter if you started with A, B, or C, because your best outcome is still going to be here. And that's the part that's a little bit heartbreaking when I hear someone say, "Oh, well, I've got this grade because I know because I made a call or I saw it on their website or this or that." You know, good for you for getting some information on it. But I also don't want you to feel duped. And that's when I think you and I get the reach outs from pet parents. That's why
Yeah.
they're reaching out because they're feeling like, what I was told it was this. I had an expectation of this, yet I got that. And I feel horrible for doing that to my pet. I never would have done that. It's that whole like, well, if I had known, I would have bought, the best. Well, this is just a starting point and one of the factors. So don't let, something like it's got a grade. I mean, we grow up from childhood on, being graded, I've got kids in school and, it's like, oh, my grades. I'm like, throw away the grades. How are you feeling? What's your knowledge base? Grades are subjective and I can twist them 15 different ways. I want to know that you're grasping the concept. I want to know that you know how to apply it. Same thing here. You know, because there are feed grading ingredients that I would argue are not that much different um, than at least food grade. Human grade, there is that extra level, so there is some oversight. But it's in that combination, and you and I talk about balance a lot. Wow, that's the problem, right? If you're starting at the bottom of that in combination with others, or if you're starting at the top, but you're bringing it down with additional things being put into it that bring it down the chain, how much of an impact did that really help?
Right. Well, if I'm sitting here while you were talking about
Pontificating?
thinking about how would I relate that to human food? Feed grade to me for human food would be high fructose corn syrup, canola oil, genetically modified, which you're definitely going to get in most pet foods. Bioengineered, all of those things. I mean, let's face it, we have problems with human food systems. Pet food is just the dumping ground
Yeah.
for everything that you can't do, that you can't sell in human foods. So, I had a conversation also with a pet parent who said, "Well, I don't want to feed anything processed." And they were buying raw. And I was like, okay, I struggled over this one, because like, do I tell her? I told her. I said, so let me make sure you have an understanding. I own a store. Everything in here is processed. Okay. There is some better than the other. Well, no, I'm buying the raw. Right, but it's processed.
Yeah.
Okay, you're not taking the straight meat and adding just straight vegetables and things. It goes through a processing. It goes through whether it's a processing of HPP or bacteriophages or just how it's put together, however it comes in. There's a process that takes place to get it to its end product that you're buying. And it's the same thing if you're buying a cooked or an air dried or a freeze dried. It's still processed. Is there better processing than others? 100%. But you have to get to that level of understanding and not buy into the manipulations of, well, because I'm feeding this, I'm not feeding anything processed. You are, though, and it's okay. It's okay because you could be feeding that, which would be way worse. But again, the closer you get to real food, the closer you get to fresh food, the
Yeah.
closer you get to, less cooked, less overcooked, less diminished and usable product, the closer you get to a better diet to be consumed all the way around. And that's difficult. I mean, let's face it, all of us, just as humans, we all cheat. We all eat stuff that is bad for us, because it's good. It's really yummy. If you look at some of the worst pet foods out there, some animals are crazy about them. That is by design, and they're yummy as all get out. But, and I've had that conversation with clients go, but he loves it. I'm like, mm-hmm. I know, and lots of people like I don't know, candy bars. But again, it's not something you should make a steady diet of. And they don't really understand it. And again, it isn't easy. Clients will tell me all the time, show me on the packaging where the grading is. I can't show you on the packaging. They don't put
Right.
that there. It's the same
Well,
thing with
and
companies. It's the same thing with companies who don't break up the protein to tell you how much of it is plant and how much of it is meat protein. Because I don't give 2 cents over how much of it is plant protein. I'm feeding a facultative carnivore or a carnivore. So right then and there, this is not the food that I should be feeding, without boosting it or without making a change to be sure that I'm nurturing the animal that I'm feeding.
yeah, no, and I love that what you just called out. Even if it's on the package, even if it's in the pitch from the company, there is not a breakdown of those ingredients and which ones are which grade and all. There's not enough room on a label to do that. Okay. Let alone they're just not going to put in that effort because, let's also be real. Most of the time, these companies don't have people at their co-packer for every run that's going on.
Right.
So there's that reality. Then something else that you said, I just want to make sure too, is that I think I had this conversation not too long ago about the term ugly vegetables, right? Vegetables that couldn't be sold in the store because they don't look right, but are otherwise. And I love those. Once had a subscription service to one of those entities. Now I can just go to the local farmers market and find them really easy, so I don't worry about that. But I love that stuff. I love that stuff for me, my family, as well as my furry family, right? As well as for the tortoises, as well as for the bearded dragon. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not
Right.
talking about things that don't look appealing but still have a ton of nutrition. We're talking about things that unfortunately have been degraded to the point where the nutritional value is likely not effective enough for it to really be something of positive substance in what you're feeding. Um, and I think that's important. And I know you and I have had this conversation, and I apologize to all of you out here. Hopefully, you didn't sit down to eat and turn on this particular podcast episode because Lauren and I have probably made a stomach or two turn. And I'm about to do it one more time here. Lauren, I would love for you to share with everybody. You and I have these conversations about roadkill, and we know folks who have shared, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I just got this, roadkill, a deer, etc. Um, my pet is going to eat tremendous. And people's reactions surprise you and I. But why does it surprise you and I?
It, the first time I heard it, I was like, ah, I was so grossed out, because I've seen roadkill and it's like, no, I could never feed, my little princesses that. Um, but I actually stumbled across, or it was recommended to me by social media or something like that. There are groups online on social
Yeah,
media that actually are roadkill groups.
yep,
And I had to understand it. I had to know about it. And I got into it. And once you get past the no, 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 that's going on and the whole time that you're thinking about it, you start to understand why they do it and the areas of the country that they do it in and the reasoning behind it. So I get it to the extent that if you can be sure that this is a healthy creature that
right.
suffered as a result of, just the modernness of speeding cars in their
Wrong
neighborhoods, and
place, wrong time.
right,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, the fact that we're encroaching into all their lands. Um, that's one thing. My bigger concern comes into play when it was the animal poison. Did they stumble out into the road because they were poisoned and disoriented?
Sure.
Is there some way to test that? Because I know here in Texas, there are people who will pick up deer that have been hit and they'll
Yeah.
just load them up. And, there's that wasting disease that they have to have them tested for, whether they shoot the deer or whether they pick the deer up off the roadside, they have to test for that. And it's all, I'll confess, I'm a city girl, so it's all a little bit, like, whoa, yes, I'm a hypocrite. My meat comes wrapped in cellophane, and doesn't have a face, and it doesn't look like what it was when it was, because then I'd never eat it. So admitted hypocrite. But I get it. If it's more likely to be that if dogs were out and about, they'd eat it, they'd pick it up, but the dog would know. The dog would be able to sniff it and know if something was wrong with it too. There's a lot of animal instinct that kicks into place. So, it's just thinking about those things and ensuring that those have been addressed. I can't really find a reason not to think that's okay.
Right. No, and like you, I mean, I was introduced to it many years ago by several folks who were doing it, and they swear by it, and they've had very healthy, successful outcomes with their pets. So, and
And
that's
it's
why
free. And it's free.
it's free. It's a resource that otherwise is going to go to waste, or realistically, other animals in the wild are going to feed on that. I
Exactly.
My concern always is like you, the point, did something poison it, which is why it's just so important. I see folks quite often like, oh, just put a rat poison out there. I'm like, the ecosystem damage to something like that is really unbelievable if you were to look into it. um, and so, but I wanted to hit on another one that you and I have talked about as well that I think people would be surprised. You and I have advocated many times for different folks, and that is we have human standards of when something should be sold by or used by.
Right.
And to me, this is one of my golden saving, scenarios, which is, oh, the meat can't be sold for human after this date, but that one day later, it can and is
Hmm.
often used. And I knew a couple of rescue organizations that was how they were actually able to feed their animals
Right.
a much better, healthier diet, not by going out and getting the on target date, but the day of and day after, and even beyond. Freezer burn. You and I have talked about that. Freezer burn is
Yep.
a human concept. I've never had Sugar, Zoe, Bella, any of the animals I've run into go, hey, looks like there's a little freezer burn on this steak here. You want to
Hmm.
return that, get me a new one? So all that to say that and where we started off too, by the way. So feed grade versus a little bit of freezer burn. I know which way I'm going. And hopefully after this video, you all have that as well. I want
Well,
to give you the
just
last
boost
word.
your meals. Yeah, boost your meals, add real food, add real meat, to whatever it is you're feeding. Do the best that you can. It's 50% off if you buy it past the date. Give it the smell test. There's no reason that you can't feed better than what you are,
Yeah,
and not have it be painful and have it
I,
not be painful. Yes.
I love that. Hey, we know you've got a lot going on in your week. Thank you for joining us here on Practical Pet Chat. You can reach out to us with your suggestions, your tips, maybe your questions as well at practicalpetchat@gmail.com. Hit us up on all the different social media networks, our website, practicalpetchat.com. So many things going on for Lorin and I, but we really appreciate you taking the time with us. Make sure you share what we're doing with one of your friends this week. Maybe they'll pick up a tip or two. Thanks again. Appreciate you.
Bye, guys.
The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as, nor should it be construed as, professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment for your pets. Always seek the advice of a qualified veterinarian with any questions you may have regarding your pet's health or medical condition. Never disregard professional veterinary advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The hosts and the guests of this podcast are not liable for any actions taken based on the information shared during these episodes. Any reliance on the information provided is solely at your own risk. Copyright 2025 Practical Pet Chat, all rights reserved. Unauthorized duplication, distribution, or reproduction of any content from this podcast, including but not limited to audio, scripts, and show notes, is prohibited without prior written consent. The opinions and views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Practical Pet Chat.